Welcome everybody. Welcome Tom, Shah, Carly. So we'll start with what is everyone drinking? If you do have a beverage, I have a margarita. So Tom, what about you?
I'm still on the red wine as
Shah's
as 2 weeks ago.
Shaw is a Ball's Point, and Carly has a manuscript revision due Monday. Oh, oh wait, I think Carly muted Discord. Let me 1 second. Let's get this figured out.
Hi.
There it goes.
There we
There
go.
you are.
Okay, we're good now, Carly. Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, this is coffee because I have a manuscript revision due very shortly, and that's what's the plan for post this chat. So
Awesome. Well, it sounds like an exciting weekend plan. So yeah, so Carly, well, one of the things we'll start with is just so what does conservation technology mean to you, and tell us a little bit about what you do in this space.
yeah, so I'm a PhD student, actually a PhD candidate as of like a month ago.
Congrats.
Thank you, in primatology at the CUNY Graduate Center, so the city of New York, CUNY. So I'm based at that university in New York City, but I work in Madagascar. So my advisor's lab, and Dr. Andrea Baden, she has a genetics lab that's at Hunter College, which is another CUNY campus, and then a field site in Madagascar. So it's Ranamafan National Park. It's a rainforest, and we study lemurs there, specifically black and white ruffed lemurs, which I literally have are like the background on my phone. I was gonna like pull up a picture, but here, this is just these little fluffy guys. Literally the background on my phone. I also have them tattooed on me, so that's how so much I love lemurs. My dissertation specifically on their vocalizations, and they make really obnoxious calls, which is weird, but also a good thing because they're very easy to detect for passive acoustic monitoring. So this is the conservation tech part of my research. Passive acoustic monitoring is basically just using autonomously deployed remote recorders. So it's basically the equivalent of a camera trap, like a trail cam, but for sound. So it is tuned to, you can specify a specific frequency range and set it, and you put it up and just leave it, and they can run for like months without needing to get like batteries or SD card changes. And they'll just run the whole time, and that obviously like results in a huge amount of data, and not all of it is stuff that I personally am interested in, right? We're getting the whole soundscape of this tropical rainforest. So as you can imagine, there's birds and frogs and bats and lots of different animals. But how to pull out just the ruffed lemur calls that I'm interested in, or any specific call that someone would be interested in using passive acoustic monitoring, is typically we train a machine learning model and to pick out the calls of interest. So that's the more programmy side of it, which I am admittedly not an expert in. I come from a very conservation side of conservation tech. But yeah, you can basically then use the detected calls, and based on which devices that you deploy that picked them up, and how far apart they are, and the differences of the sound wave on the time of arrival at each device, you can actually do like things like occupancy modeling, or assess presence absence in like of a certain species in a fragment. So Madagascar has a really high deforestation rate. A lot of the tropical rainforest is fragments. So trying to understand which fragments have which lemur species and which don't, and then trying to kind of get at their abundance or range. Ruffed lemurs specifically are cool because they have a contagious chorus, meaning that once one starts roar shrieking, that is the technical term, a roar shriek, the rest of the subgroup goes off, and out of sight subgroups will like answer them and stuff. And so it's a very loud call on top of the fact that there are like 5 individuals calling at the same time. And I'm trying to see if you can actually use some sort of acoustic index to somewhat reliably estimate how many individuals are in a chorus calling, because then on top of just like the distribution of the calls that you can pick up, you could get at abundance and like some preliminary numbers of, you know, okay, 4 calling over here, and then like there are at least 3 in a different spot calling over here. And so, yeah, that's kind of my dissertation. Half of it is the more evolutionary bio side of like, why do they make these really obnoxious, weird calls? And the other half is using said obnoxious roar shriek calls to assist in their monitoring efforts and the conservation of that species and potentially other lemurs. I don't know of any. Sorry, I don't know if.
Go ahead, Carly.
I don't know of anyone who is doing like passive acoustics with lemurs specifically. Primates, even in general, the primatology field seems to have lagged behind a little. So passive acoustic monitoring has been big with like people studying marine mammals and birds and bats, even frogs. But the primatology field is kind of just entering this. So it's a both good and bad that you're at the forefront of it, but also you're going off of like very little previous research. And so a lot of it is very trial and error, which is, you know, that's the fun of science, I suppose.
So do you build the devices yourself, or are you kind of reapplying some sort of, could you talk a little bit about, and the reason I ask is, so last week, Shaw and I got to talk with Sarah about AI and these sort of things. And so I'm curious with some of this, and we've talked about keeping the end user in mind. So what kind of technology do you use? And is it kind of for exactly what you're working on? Or was it meant to use for something and then you're just applying it to lemurs?
So this is the devices I use. Well, there's a number of different devices. They're called ARUs, autonomous recording units, which just basically means that they can be remotely deployed and they will trigger recording without you needing to do anything personally. It's automatic. So there's a couple different models. I use Swift units, which the Cornell Lab of Ornithology developed in-house. So at Cornell University, I did my undergrad there, so I knew a bunch of the people at the lab. Or obviously with the name, it's focused on birds, but they have a software and hardware team in-house, which is somewhat rare for most like research labs. But so they've developed all of this stuff, like hardware and software, that's at cost. So you're just paying for like parts and labor. That's the point, is for it to be like affordable and accessible and easy to use. So it's basically very simple. I as a non-tech person can very easily like maneuver it. I don't have to be like doing any soldering or electrical work, which would probably end horribly. But so you can get them also in what's called a rugged version, because I'm in the tropical rainforest of Madagascar. It's very humid. There's lots of bugs. It's basically where technology should go to die. But so we have to attempt to counteract all of that stuff. So they've basically built the unit into a pelican case. So it's like a small pelican case, and then they've put the like, I don't know, the motherboard, I don't even know the proper term for it, with like inside with a battery pack attachment, and you can get 1 or 2 6-pack holders for D batteries. So it can hold up to like 12 D batteries at a time. And it's in a pelican case. So it's like waterproof, insect proof, all of that. And because you can put like some pretty heavy duty batteries in there, they can run. I was using rechargeable batteries, not even alkaline, and I still could have them run for like 3 months without me needing to change out the batteries. And if you put, it can support up to like a 528 gig SD card. So if you put, I had 256 gig cards in there, but so then you basically don't need to replace the batteries or the SD card for months, which is good because at the site we're at, it's, an 8-hour drive from the capital of Madagascar to get to the national park. And then the research station we are based out of is still, you have to go on a 7-hour hike into the forest. And that's where our bush camp is. So we are completely off the grid. There's no electricity. We can't use solar panels because the canopy is so thick that sun does not reach the ground. So we can't use like solar energy, for example, or it's very difficult. You would have to climb trees.
And that's, so I think that's one of the important things that we've harped on a lot during these is if you don't think of the end user, right? It's like, oh yeah, just put a solar panel on it and that will recharge the battery. And then you get there and you're like, cool, it sees sun 1 minute out of every 24 hours. And it doesn't apply much in that situation. And I'm curious, we can get to the great debate on the best species in a bit. But Tom, do y'all have some projects that are going on that you're looking at supporting that are in a similar area in terms of bioacoustics or just in terms of location in Madagascar?
Okay. Gosh.
Putting you on the
Well,
spot.
yeah, seriously. So there's lots going on in acoustic monitoring and stuff. The Audio Moth has been an awesome little piece of gear for allowing people to start building their own technology and using acoustic monitoring, and kind of integrating that into what you're actually building and allowing different people to do it. And so there's a number of different projects that are doing some of similar kind of passive acoustic monitoring. We've seen a number of them around some specific areas, kind of trying to, I'm trying to think about, I think that there's one that I'm thinking of and I just caught myself and I think I'm not allowed to talk about it. But the one that I've seen specifically is trying to get insect noise and seeing if you can identify a species down to the level of invasive or non-invasive, native, non-native. There was another that I think was focused around bees and bee colony health. And so there's like the range of different projects that you can use on some of the passive acoustic monitoring is really high. But in terms of some of the specific Ranamophana or other Madagascar products, I don't know that we actually have an awful lot of those projects on the project platform. So I work with I've been on the floor plenty of times, but I work with ConservationX Labs. I work with a community of people doing conservation technology projects, and we have about 390 projects on an online platform called the Digital Makerspace. And so that's, my rolling through the Rolodex of different projects of trying to think of the ones that are specific to Madagascar. And we have a couple like molecular lab based, but I don't think that we have any on acoustic monitoring.
And this goes for all y'all. Do you find acoustic monitoring is centered around specific species? I know, Carly, you talked about this earlier, but Tom, so it sounds like a lot of the examples you gave are insects. I mean, can these be used for, an example, I work with elephants, like things that are looking at infrasonic communication and some of those types of things. So like really low frequencies, like is it able to be applied across a bunch of different range of species?
Yeah, so it there, in terms of like infrasonic and there's a ton of bat work in passive acoustics, and even though they are, and there are some mouse lemurs that can hit hypersonic frequencies. So you can definitely do that. The nice thing about many of the like devices, there are a lot, right? The Audio Moth, I have a bunch of them that I'm trying out. The biggest thing for me was that you can only put like a couple AA batteries in there, and so I'm trying to figure out a good external battery setup of some kind for those Audio Moths. And then I also need a good case. So they just came out with a like official case model, because a lot of people were like DIYing it or just like putting them in plastic bags. And I was like, that will not fly in Madagascar.
I've seen Tupperware too, right? You'll cut a hole in Tupperware for the cables and then put some hot glue in there, and that's a little better than a Ziploc bag.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's still not going to work in the rainforest of Madagascar. So the Swift units, for example, they have the microphone embedded on the inside, and then they've put a hole through the Pelican case, and they have over it this hydrophobic material that doesn't attenuate sound. So it doesn't impede sound waves going into the microphone like a Tupperware container might, for instance, because you don't like sound waves can kind of deflect off of cases if you don't have something specific over the microphone. So yeah, I had been trying to figure out how to use the Audio Moth like in a good way in my project, which involves a good enough case and some sort of external battery power to keep it running for longer, because it's a very hilly environment where we are. It ranges from like 700 to 1200 meters. And so getting around like a crow's eye distance or whatever.
As a crow flies?
Of like, yeah. 200 meters as the crow flies is going to take you like far longer than that, because we're bushwhacking, one, in a very dense understory, and it's like straight up and straight down with like a bunch of rivers thrown in for fun.
So with this hilly environment, I think it kind of relates to a question Flames had in chat. So like, are you able to at all, if you have a bunch of these monitoring devices, can you pinpoint locations? Is that possible at all? And is it more of like you pinpoint a latitude, longitude, and latitude, and then you can, or is it a region? Like they're going to be somewhere in a specific region?
Yeah, so you can do what's called like multilateration, which is basically triangulating where a sound is coming from. So that's what I was talking about earlier with the time of arrival differences. So if you have all of your devices synced, there are like very minute time of arrival distances that the sound wave like coming into the device. There will be like very small ones that it can pick up on, and it uses those time of arrivals to, if you have 3 units, basically triangulate it and put a point. But there's obviously a lot of error with that, so it's I mean, it's accurate to, it depends on how accurate you need something to be. There's a paper I can look up, they did on orangutans, that orangutan long calls, and they could triangulate the call to like within 50 like plus or minus 50 meters, which may or may not be a long distance depending on what you're trying to do. So definitely possible, not entirely like very kind of unique. It would have, yeah, it's unique to different use cases, I guess.
Yeah, I think that the triangulation stuff like is big in like things outside of like ecology, right? So there's like systems that can do things like gunshot detection, and they use triangulation to try and figure out where that comes from. But like I think to get back to that that question you had about the species, from somebody who doesn't, we've done acoustic projects at Conservationix before, but it's not like our primary bread and butter. And like from looking from the outside into the acoustic world, it seems like, you know, the giants in the room are the birds and the bats, right? Is that correct? Like there's a lot of bird and bat people doing acoustics, a ton, right?
Yeah.
There's also a lot of like whale people and stuff that are doing acoustics.
Marine mammal people.
Marine mammals like acoustics as well. And then in the conservation tech space, there's also projects that are focused around human activity detection. So there's a lot of work in ocean noise. There's a lot of work around, there's work around deforestation. So listening for things like motorcycles or chainsaws and stuff. Poachers, yeah, gunshot sort of noises, poachers and things like that. The project that we had at Conservationix was actually with an organization that works for deforestation with Rainforest Connection. So we were on a National Geographic grant together that investigated looking at that, but adapting it for oceans. So like, how can you use their systems to listen for vessel traffic in marine protected areas and things like that? Because there has been some really great research in acoustics and in listening to vessels and trying to understand even like specific fishing activities or even like size of vessel that can be figured out from the acoustic signature, based off of prop noise and stuff.
I think that they're even able to get down to specific boat, or there are people at least working on it, that you can, if you've got like an engine knock or something that is a unique kind of acoustic signature per boat. So yeah, there's at least, we've had a project that's been working on that. They were a Connex Tech Prize fellow last year, and they're working on a buoy for marine protected areas, that they're just these smart buoys that they have around, and when a boat pulls up, it can identify the boat, has the audio, and if it's an actual marine protected area, then they can, activate a speaker that lets them know or tells them on a radio frequency. So there's some work going on with that too.
Yeah, and sorry.
Go ahead, Carly. Go ahead. Yeah.
I would say there's also a growing field of what's called ecoacoustics, or like soundscape analysis, which is rather than looking for a specific species, you're actually encompassing the whole soundscape, all the animals, all the natural like rain, river flowing, trees blowing in the wind, that kind of thing. And there's a number of acoustic indices that you can derive from those soundscapes. There was just a paper that came out like a couple of weeks ago that basically it could predict like the ecosystem type based on the soundscape, and you can like changes in the soundscape can reflect like certain species decreasing, and that they've done a lot of really cool stuff in the sound, looking at actually the entire soundscape as a whole and not just searching for specific species. So that's another area of like whole ecosystem, like health monitoring, basically.
there's actual also like just a bunch of like acoustics nerds that love going out into nature and recording, like using binaural microphones or whatever, you know, so you could hear it as it's kind of going around you. When we were doing a lot of work in Botswana, and we would take those microphones, you wear them in your ears and walk around and like just get the whole, you know, lions in the background in the distance over here.
It's like
ASM,
nature
hippos
ASMR.
splashing around in the, yeah, it's amazing. It's really cool.
Well, I'm curious about when you talk about some of these things, right? When you think of bioacoustics and all these, as an engineer, so Carly, you're like the biologist and you're the person like going. So what are some of the challenges that you face with the tech that you use? That like, because you talked earlier about like, oh, you're so glad that you don't have to solder and all these sort of things. But what are the challenges of because I mean, this is, we'll keep saying it over and over again, but in thinking about the person that's actually deploying it, I think 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, Shah talked about like the going in with, what was it? It was like 60 camera traps and then like 59 of them, right? And so what are some of the challenges that you've gone through? And you talked some about the environment and those sort of things. So what are things that if I was to design a bioacoustics device for you to use in Madagascar, what are some of the challenges, like the engineering challenges that you think that you've had to deal with in that space?
So this, I mean, I won't go into a rant, but it's kind of a combination of hardware and software, because ideally what you'd want is to have the machine learning model basically input like on the hardware device so that it's like real-time detection recognition. So rather than right now, what we do, we deploy the devices, then we pull SD cards, and you have like 4 terabytes of data, and you feed that into a model, and using so I was lucky in that I had like a training data set to work from, because while the passive acoustic devices were running, we do full day focal follows on the Ruffed Lemurs to do behavioral observations, and I had a shotgun mic, which is like a directional microphone, to get their some of their quieter calls. So the roar shrieks are kind of their loud call, and that's what the passive acoustics I'm focusing on, but they have a number of other calls that are like contact calls, short distance. And so to record those, you need to be like actively following them. And from that, I also had roar shrieks. So the roar shrieks from my active recording, I kind of started to build a training data set from that. And then I'm trying right now to like potentially mix background noise from the passive data with those, because they're like really high quality calls, and the passive acoustic data is typically not that. The signal to noise ratio is like not great. So that's kind of where I'm at now. But say that I have a model and it's detecting the ruffed lemurs really well, then like putting that like architecture into the configuration of the device so that it's doing all of that processing on board rather than us having to do it afterwards. So, and it cuts down on the amount of data you have to go through afterwards, because it's only recording. You can set it to like only record when it's, 70%, at least 50% sure that it's a lemur calling or something like that. Or, having that like onboard detection or classification would save lots of man hour or woman hours just going through spectrograms, which are basically a visual representation of sound. So typically you have like on the y-axis is frequency and the x-axis is time. You can also have waveforms which have amplitude on the y-axis, which is how loud a call is. Frequency is the pitch. So you can and because spectrograms are images really, you can actually use very similar like model architecture for passive acoustic stuff, because you actually are doing the testing and training on the spectrogram, which is an image, and different points on it are like typically different colors, which indicates power at that frequency at that time. So yeah, if all that processing could be like avoided and just done on the device, that would be lovely.
So the stuff that you collect, is it is all of your data open source?
So this is the other thing. There's not really like there's nowhere for me to put it. Like I would love to upload it somewhere, but it's so much data. It's like I have 4 terabytes just from like 8 months. And affordability gets into a lot of the more open source, like open access kind of repositories have limits on data, on the like amount of data you can upload for free, and then you have to start paying after that, or there are a lot of repositories, like for example, the Maculae Library or Xenocanto, which are just specific species calls. It's not the whole soundscape. So Xenocanto is great, but it's only birds right now. And so if there was like a primate version of that, that would be great. I have this pipe dream to like start a primate acoustics consortium that got put on hold because of COVID. But basically to do just that, make like a primate version of Xenocanto, because I can't tell you how many primatologists I've talked to that are like, oh yeah, I have a bunch of vocalization data. Like, oh yeah, I think I had a student do that in like the 90s, and it's all there, but there's nowhere for people to put it. And especially soundscape data there's really not a repository like for soundscape data unless you know of one.
Well, I'm interested in that though, because there's kind of, you said that part of the problem is storage. You're talking about, the cost of storing multi terabytes in, Amazon Web Servers, something like that. Yep. One, I imagine that there's there's Microsoft AI for Earth, and they do grants for storage on Azure, and Amazon also has some of the, initiatives that they bring in for good tech for good projects like that. And so those may be kind of bring the cost down. But then the other option is there any other way to store in a slightly non-terabyte format, or that would make that the cost be able to come down that way, and then be able to, even if you were to do something like a really rough version that just says contact Carly for the full 4 terabyte version, and then just store the very, very,
it's like I have data
version
of frequency, amplitude, etc. of this species in this location with this information, and then
it sounds like this broadly.
And here's an example of what I have.
Thumbnail image.
Yeah, a thumbnail image. And then so what I'm hearing is, Tom, is you'd like somebody to submit this at the next in the next Makerspace project.
Let's keep blowing it up and bigger, right? Yeah. Why make a primate specific one? There's already a bird specific one. So why don't we make an all animals one, and then just get ambassadors and heroes of these individual clades and groups to focus on, building the primatology set. The birds and the bats are already fine.
Yeah, so
tons
Shah
of them.
said the birds and bats are fine. So
yeah, and then but focus on the people like the primatologists that have been saying, if only we had this for a long time, and get them to just start focus on one and then build outwards.
So
Well,
that's why.
You could go ahead, Carly.
So you can compress the audio. You can compress it down into like 16-bit, 8-bit, 24-bit. I think there's like different, and then you can save it as different file types, like not as WAV files as another like file type. So yeah, there's ways of compressing it down. I know of AI for Earth and did apply. I have to do it again. So I could get storage, but like, I don't know. I mean, I would ideally like it to not come from a for-profit like repository. I wish it would be more organic, something like Lila BC. So that has data sets that are like machine learning ready. So it's like it's like annotated calls or something. So I couldn't put my like full soundscape data there, but I can put my training data set there. And
I was just gonna say, like I mean, that's the issue with doing that thumbnail idea, right? Is like the benefit behind open access data is all the data is open, so other people can, do analysis on it, help build models around it, do all of these sorts of things that if you just gave a little snapshot, like it's not solving the problem, right? The problem is getting people access to data that they want to have access to. I'm sorry, I just poked more holes in it. I didn't come with a solution to that one.
No, this is why I really love like this fact that these recorders, they don't like, they record the whole soundscape. So for a camera trap, there's a lot of like quote unquote bycache. So it's like you'll get an image of something that you're not necessarily interested in, but like someone else might be. And with the soundscape data, like I'm just running my Ruffed Lemur training data set through and picking out my Ruffed Lemur calls. The rest of it is like open. So you can have people working on specific species, like at the same time on the same soundscape. Someone could be doing the blue kua, which is a parrot-like thing. And, the tree frogs that like, you could all be doing that from the same like soundscape file. So
how did the so you talked earlier about the bioscape, like I play you sound and you're like, this is the biome. So how did they get that? Because to me, the only way to get to that point is you go, okay, here is 10,000, this is a data set of 10,000 of 100 different species of mammals for you to be able to figure out where they are. Like, how can you play a sound and it immediately knows if it doesn't have collections of these audio files from basically every single known biome? Does that make sense?
Well, so the soundscapes aren't, I'm not sure I understood your question. The soundscapes are literally just like long-term recordings of like in a forest or in a desert. And
ambient noise, sleep sound recording.
Yeah, they're tied to a specific location. It's just all the noises in a specific location, right?
I see. So it's not going, oh, I just heard a African forest elephant call, I must be an X. It like, okay, sorry.
But that's the exciting thing is that by having that soundscape as a file that you can just put up and be like, here's 4 terabytes of soundscape, then people who already have, Carly has training models for black ruffed lemurs, but somebody who has a training model for some small, never before seen frog can plug it into the soundscape and find the individual times that it actually pulls down out of that.
I guess that's what I was thinking about is from an ecology perspective, right? There's a bunch of people doing individual or population ecology with bioacoustics. But like to me what's fascinating is if you could do it and then you're like, "Oh, hey, African elephants are actually in this range now because this can only see this, and could we actually detect them from?" And but again,
Well,
I feel like, oh, go ahead, Shaw.
I was just going to say there are places where the only way you can tell what's in that area is through sound, right? And forest elephants are a perfect example of that. Like, ask people who study forest elephants how often they see them. It's not very often, but they hear them a lot.
I mean, the only reason we find the lemurs is because we have 35 animals radio collared. So it's not GPS collars, it's just like basic telemetry. Stick the thing in the air and wait for the beep. So my advisor has over the course of like 10 years done kind of darting seasons where the new juveniles or something get collars. And so we now have roughly 35 that have a unique color combination on their collar because they all look exactly the same. They're so fluffy that you can't look for like scars or individual markings or like things like that. There's like very little variation in their pelage, and they are emergent canopy specialists, so they live way at the tops of the trees, and we are on the ground with our binoculars, breaking our necks, having that be the constant position. So honestly, it's more for the individual IDs, but yes, we can also find them based on their radio frequencies. But if we didn't have that, then you'd hear them and you'd be like, oh, they're right there. Like, I can hear them from there, but that's about as good as you could do.
Yeah, I feel like and sound is just so complicated too, because I mean, a camera trap is kind of simple, right? You like something walks in front of it, but then with like sound waves, right? If it's reflecting off of something or any sort of things, you can get like not false positives, but with some of that location stuff, I think it would just be a little more challenging. And so Flames had some like questions like, would torrent peer-to-peer storage work for storing some of these things? I think, yeah,
I'm glad Flames brought that up because I was trying to figure out like who else solves this problem. Like other people must solve I have giant files and I need other people to be able to have access to them. And so that torrenting idea is kind of set it up remotely and have multiple people each and seated at the same time. Does anybody do that?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that we're actually building into the back end of Field Kit is this thing that's called the Dap Protocol, and it's a distributed web protocol. It gets it basically was created in the science world, but within the world of genetics as a way to move gigantic data sets between person to person without having to take them up through the cloud and bring them down or sneaker net them over to other people on external hard drives and stuff. And so there's a lot of really interesting mechanisms behind how DAT works. And I don't know specifically how it would deal with audio files, but I suspect that you could do that. The one caveat is like you have to build in the mechanisms to be able to share data that way, but you could just push those big files peer to peer, like person to person, without actually having to upload it first and then subsequently download it. So there is stuff there to do it.
Yeah, because Flame seems to know more about this than I definitely do. Sorry,
the Pirate Bay of lemur acoustics. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah, no, and that's why I love like the Soundscape data, because you can get at like presence and absence of all of these species simultaneously. So whereas a camera trap, you have different animals going by and like you might pick them up at different rates or something like that. If you have, which granted, this is obviously for very vocal species, this only works well, but like a lot of species that are hard to study tend to be pretty vocal. So it's interesting because you can also then get into like, oh, well, if their calls are sexually dimorphic, then you can actually say like, oh, this is a male calling and this is a female calling. Or if the acoustic structure is different between juveniles and adults, and things like, or if they have specific context-specific calls, like, oh, this is an alarm call, there's a predator around, or this is a mating call, they're like courtship. You can get so much information from a vocalization that because we know that there are even individual differences, sex differences, age differences, context differences in calls. Like many studies across species have shown this. And so you can pull, like you can try to pull some of that information too, on top of just like presence absence of a species and, you know, distribution and things like that. And with the ruffed lemurs, the choruses. So actually I've been looking at the wolf literature a lot because howls are kind of the same contagious chorus mechanism. So yeah, there's so much information there.
So what is, sorry, could you describe more contagious chorus? And then Tom, you go ahead.
I'm going to jump in first because I'm jumping in to say goodbye and say thank you, Carly. It was awesome chatting with you. We're going to have to settle the big showdown of best lemur later. You're going to have to, everybody, there's a lot of opinions in the ConservationX Lab offices about best lemur. Red ruffed lemur has a strong argument. Vaca has a strong argument. Indri has a strong argument, but
I will convince. Well, I would go with red ruffed. I would either of the ruffed lemurs.
Yeah.
I study the black and white flavor, but
you got to give it to those staring eyes. They really got very piercing. Go straight down into the soul.
Like,
Well, and
Varesia
somebody said
are
there's
so
a new lemur
weird.
species.
What?
There's apparently a new species of lemur.
Oh, there always are. There's like every year.
Yeah, so there's a new species of mouse lemur named after Jonah Ratzenbazafi, who is a really amazing pioneering primatologist from Madagascar. He's actually currently the president of the International Primatological Society right now, and he is like the face of lemur conservation. He's done a ton of amazing work, and so it's named after him. It's Jonah's mouse lemur, so that's really cool.
Well, that's my favorite for this week until they discover a new one. All right, listen, it was awesome.
Your next staff meeting, you bring me in, and I will have everyone convinced that ruffed lemurs are the best by the end.
Don't worry, we will have the showdown. We have, as just so everybody knows, lemurs are a big enough deal within CXL that at the end of our annual retreat every year, we do a traditional Shafaka dance, and all of us dance around the entire room, dancing like Shafakas and listening to any kind of general jump music. I think
I can attest. I've done it with them before.
Yeah, the traditional Shafaka dance is very important. All right, I'll leave you with that. Hey, Andrew, Tom, would you prefer that I exit the stream or that I just turn off the video and sound here?
So, I will handle it on my end. So what I will just do is I will just mute you and we'll go from there. So thanks, Tom. Catch you later. Bye. Okay. Well, I guess Tom is heading out, so he will have the black screen of death for a little bit. But yeah. So why are there new lemur species that get? I mean, I feel like this. I guess this year, maybe it was 2019. We did get a new species of elephant for the first time in a very long time. So I am close to knowing more about my species in terms of. So why are they just finding new ones every single year in unexplored places?
No, it's more that they have cryptic genetic diversity. So for one, most lemurs are small and nocturnal, meaning that prior to like a couple decades ago, we had like no way to know that they existed or study them because, you know, we couldn't see them. So there's been a lot of, like, since the 90s, I would say, a ton of kind of new species because we just had like the technology to be able to see them at night or detect them in some way. And it's a lot of them look very similar, but the genetic diversity is actually quite large. So it's called cryptic speciation, which is basically that a lot of lemurs that look like they're the same species actually are not. And, you know, depending on what your definition of a species is, this is a very extensive debate in the phylogenetic community of like, you know, what level of genetic difference warrants a new species. And, you know, being named a species has a lot of different ramifications for conservation listings and therefore, you know, access to money and access to legal protection. And so there's a very intense ongoing debate about what is a species and whether these are all made up or if it's really the species. Like, yeah, it's, I am not a phylogenetics person, but the taxonomy of those lemur species is very contested. So there's something like 15 mouse lemur species now.
It's like 100 total, right? There's like 100 lemur species.
There's about 130 lemur species.
See, that's cool. But it's also because Madagascar is like an amazing place, right? Like it's just a really unique.
For lack of a better phrase, weird shit happens on islands. And that's
Australia.
Basically just, yeah, I mean, yeah, right? Papua New Guinea, Madagascar, Sumatra, Borneo, New Zealand, you know, all of this stuff you find these really high rates of endemism, meaning the animals and plants there are found nowhere else on Earth. So a lot of, something like 70% of Madagascar's biodiversity is endemic to the island. And the reason that lemurs particularly were able to spread into all of these different niches is that they didn't have competition for a lot of them. So there's no other primates, whereas, you know, in Africa or Asia, there might be like a ton of different species, not species, I mean families, right? So in Africa, you can have chimpanzees and gorillas and, you know, a guanin species all on top of each other. But Madagascar also, compared to other tropical areas like the Amazon and Southeast Asia, they have a pretty low diversity of bats and birds. So lemurs are actually one of the major pollinators in Madagascar and seed dispersers. So ruffed lemurs, actually, the reason they're called ruffed lemurs is they have this like beard of hair, and it's called a ruff. And when they stick their face into the flowers, the nectar and pollen gets stuck on their ruff, and then they go off to another tree, and that's how they pollinate. So they're really, really important for that and for seed dispersal. The ruffed lemurs actually are, there are some plant species that the ruffed lemur is the only animal large enough to actually digest the seeds. And they've done germination experiments, and they germinate faster and better like after they've gone through the lemur digestive system. So they're really, really important for the overall health of the forest ecosystem because of these critical roles they play in regeneration. So yeah, and they don't have a lot of birds and bats to compete with. There's not any large carnivores other than the fossa, which looks kind of like a weasel, but it looks like a combination of a dog and a cat, but it's actually in the mongoose family. It's the size of like a medium-sized dog, and that's the biggest carnivore there.
I'm curious, what is it like? Could you just kind of describe fieldwork and like getting there, and what is it like to kind of get to Madagascar to do even fieldwork? And I know obviously with COVID, some of this stuff isn't possible, but yeah, could you kind of take us through a day in the life of fieldwork in Madagascar?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so there is no typical day in the life of fieldwork in Madagascar, I think is the underlying theme, because every day is different. First, just to get there. So I'm in New York City. You take a flight to Paris. There's no direct flights. You have to lay over in Europe somewhere. That's like 7 hours. Then it's like 10 and a half, 11 down to Antananarivo, which is the capital of Madagascar, and the only international airport. You then take a 8 to 9 hour car ride down to Ranamfon National Park. We work with a really amazing research station there. It's called Center Valbio. And it's a very long-standing, well-known research station in that region. And then from Center Valbio, we work with local Malagasy who are employed by Center Valbio, and they work with us to collect data. And I am a big proponent of, in very much including them on the research and like authorship and things like that, which gets into a whole nother like decolonizing fieldwork conversation. And then the Malagasy government actually requires all foreign researchers to fund a Malagasy graduate student in order to work there. So to build like in situ capacity, which is really awesome.
Could you talk about what in situ is? So some people in the chat might not know what
sorry.
Situ in situ.
Yeah, so that just means like in country kind of organic grassroots capacity building. So, really empowering local communities and Malagasy researchers to get more involved. Conservation has very historically been a very white place, and very much the people from the global north coming down and telling people in countries in the global south how to live their lives and how to conserve animals, and like what they're doing wrong when, we are the biggest polluters and we can't even save species in our own countries, and a plethora of other really colonial perspectives that we need to do better at moving away from. So part of that is forming actually equitable partnerships with Malagasy collaborators and with primate range country researchers to build that kind of grassroots in-country personnel and infrastructure. So like I said, we all work with Malagasy graduate students. The research techs at Center Valbio are all local Malagasy, and they are critical to the success of the project. We work with local guides. So the site I work out of is called Mangavu, which is actually the name of the closest village. And so we employ all of the people in that village who basically act as our trackers and are unbelievably, like, the reason I did not have every bone in my body broken is because of my amazing guide, Safi, who would bushwhack trails for me, and like, just like he has basically the whole like trail system of this area in his head. You can give him a leaf and he'll tell you the species of the tree it's from. It's incredible, the like knowledge of the local community and how much, again, Westerners overlook or exploit that.
And that's why it's so important. So that, I mean, you talked about like colonizing conservation, and the norm has been, and I know you mentioned it, but people might not realize that the norm is I go in, I get the research that I need, I leave, and then I don't cite anybody in any papers that I work on. I don't give any credit to anyone that helped at all in doing those sort of things. So like when you say things like that, right, it's a, I don't know, it seems like, oh, obviously that you would do something like that, and it's just not obvious at all in the traditional conservation work at all. And so that's one of the, I mean, when we talk about colonizing conservation, or some of the, a lot of times I just talk about it, it's just this kind of, and with elephants,
decolonizing conservation.
Well, and yeah, and it's with elephants, right? It's everyone's like, oh, it's gentle giants, and they're so nice, and they're so great. And I know, Shah, you went to Botswana, and it's like, if you're there and there's an elephant, you're not like, oh my gosh, let me just go get a selfie with this. It's got to be such a gentle creature. And some of those aspects of the,
I mean, I've been charged by a bunch of elephants, so they're not the most gentle creature. But this is a good conversation to have in general. One of the things we do with all of our projects is, you know, we Conservify, we just like build tech, you know, and we build tech for partners that we work with, and the partners that we work with always are like deeply embedded or from the communities that we're working in, and it's a big thing. And that's why everything we do is open source, so that, like, you know, basically we're any work that we're doing here in Los Angeles, we're taking and we're making it available for anybody to expand upon or make their own in their own sort of ways. That's the whole sort of thing. It's like we have to get away from this model where it's like, you know, white scientists from the US and UK and places like that going to places, gathering all this data, and then disappearing, right? And gaining accolades and funding, grant funding, and all this stuff based off of the research they do, when every single person who spends time in the field is completely dependent on the local community and all the folks that they work with to actually get that work done. You know, it's a absolutely fundamental part of any research in the field. It's good to see conservation like coming to terms with this and changing the way that they're doing things.
Yeah, and it's a long time coming, and it's still so much more to be done. But I think it's also, you know, like us coming in and being like, oh, well, just like lemurs, for example, are often hunted either for or captured for the illegal pet trade or for bushmeat, like protein. And so it's like, people are like, oh, well, just tell them not to do that. And it's like, okay, well, that's the only source of protein that they have. So like, you can't just tell them not to, or, you know, their livelihood is dependent on people coming to this, you know, hotel and taking pictures with the lemurs, which is its own conversation, because largely white tourists coming down and trying to like take selfies with the lemurs is not also another problem. But there's like this, you know, and why are they doing slash and burn agriculture and like destroying the forest? And there's all of these things that it's like, well, that's their life, and like, who are you to tell them how to do it differently? So it's a lot of the conservation work is really more social science than life science. Like Center Valbio, for example, the research station, and a number of other really great organizations working there. Pivot is a health organization. Lemur Love. There's a whole list. If you go to the Lemur Conservation Network, you can see all of these. They have, it's basically a consortium of conservation organizations working with lemurs. Centerville Bio has a reforestation program. They also have a health clinic that is sometimes people's only source of healthcare. They have an education program going into the schools and teaching them about, forest services like clean water and erosion control and, teaching sustainable agricultural practices and how, you can perhaps increase yield if you do agroforestry or, any number of these alternatives that works for the community and then has downstream effects on the environment. That's how you really get long-standing change rather than these short bits of someone comes in for 6 months and tries to do something, but then they leave and then everything goes back to what it was. And part of that obviously is then building on the ground support with Malagasy researchers and people leading these programs and these initiatives. And giving, putting them as authors on your paper and not just saying in the acknowledgments section, we thank these field assistants who spent, 2 years of their life collecting data that was absolutely critical to this project. And it
not
slowly
just,
starting
not
to
just
change.
that. A lot of times it's this. I just think what is important is as we go through these new projects, right, is educating people that this is a thing, because I led or did a helped with a study abroad trip to South Africa, and it was really interesting to kind of, after doing field work and understanding the sort of aspect of doing field work in this space and the difference that a lot of people who had never had that experience had in the oh yeah. And I know you mentioned giving credit where credit is due, but the people that know the most about the species are the people that live next to the species every single day, right? In the United States, we have this very, and right, we've all of our large mammals, besides basically what you have, bison and grizzly bears are gone, right? So we look elsewhere for the the sexy megafauna and
Charismatic megafauna.
Yeah, the charismatic megafauna. And so it does have some of its challenges with it, though, because there are things like, as an example, you look at all the bear species in the world, and only the bear species in North America are the ones who are not vulnerable or endangered. And so because American black bears and American brown bears, I think, are the only, North American black bears and brown bears. And so then you look at every other of the 6 extant bear species. It's but yeah, no, flames, that's literally what it's called a lot, is the characteristic sexy megafauna. Is that's why talking about elephants is really easy, because everyone knows what an elephant looks like. And for you, Carly, I'm sure there are some people in chat that mentioned oh, I had no idea that lemurs are only in Madagascar.
Yeah, so the movie really helped with getting people to know what a lemur is, but I have some qualms with it because lemurs are female dominant, pretty much all the species.
It's like Lion King. And
so it would not be King Julian, it would be Queen Julia. So that's one of this really cool thing, female dominance is widespread, not just in some, but almost all of the lemur species. And that's so cool. But yeah, so a lot of, And then a lot of people think they're monkeys. So they're not. They're, the all-encompassing term would be primates. And then there are different lineages of primates. Lemurs are one, monkeys are another, apes are another. We are apes, obviously. So yeah, I would say the most common thing is probably people say it's a monkey. And then they say, oh, do you get to cuddle with them? To which I reply, no, because they're wild animals and the illegal pet trade is a really big problem for them. And a lot of that.
Some people asked about like, I saw some people in chat are like lemurs as pets was like almost confusing, but we've talked about it some before, but if you think of if you think of a lot of this stuff, right? My take on this is like I think one of the more common ones that I'm familiar with is golden line tamarins, because we have those at Zoo Atlanta, and but it's like, yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, it's such a cute animal, I just want to take that home with me, and you're like, whoa, okay. So, and that's kind of this
I mean, the exotic pet trade is a big issue, and there's been a lot of like recent really good journalistic work around that lately, kind of highlighting a lot of the issues around that. But I don't know if this is still the case right now, but the famous statistic years ago was that there's more tigers that are
in Texas,
tigers that are in private ownership in the U.S. than there are in the wild, right? And this is like the issue with exotic animal ownership, is it becomes this thing that people want, and a lot of times people want it just because it's cute, and it outgrows them, or it's much more work than they're expecting it to be, or they're housing and treating it in a way that's not consistent with like its nature in the wild. Sorry, that's my daughter in the background. It's not a lemur yelling. But yeah, it's a big issue.
And yeah, it's one of we don't need to talk about it a ton, but just briefly, is like that's some of the things that if you've seen documentaries, TV shows like Tiger King, you see it and you're like, oh, this is nuts. But then you realize the reason those places are there is because there is a market, right? And so we've talked about it some before in this channel, but right, when you see so illegal wildlife trade in terms of everything with exotic pets, with pangolin scale, shark fin, like elephant tusks is fourth behind. I think it's drugs, human trafficking, and
guns.
And guns, yeah. And so it's number 4. So I mean, it's pretty. I think it's a $6 billion was the estimate they made, enterprise last year. So I mean, it's a big problem, and I think a lot of smaller, obviously, right, is things like elephants and stuff like that. The problem is ivory, not exotic pets, but it's a big issue that is not talked about, I think, enough.
Yeah, and so I'm seeing in the chat, so it's technically illegal to have lemurs as pets in Madagascar, but it's not really enforced. They do have them. Largely, it's because they're a tourist draw. So people will keep them in captivity if, they are in a tourist area or by a hotel or something like that, because then people will all want to take selfies with the lemur. And so like you're talking about that there being a market, like, yeah, there's a market. So like people can make money off of it, and economic status of Madagascar is very, very poor right now. So you get into this, so number of reasons why it's bad. One, they're wild animals. They have sharp teeth and claws, and they will likely try to attack you. A lot of times to circumvent that, with lemurs, as with many other primates and other animals, they may declaw the animals, they may pull their canines, they may drug them so that they don't attack people. They're typically housed very poorly, not given a proper diet, and so they die typically very quickly, and then that person has to go back out into the wild and get another one. And this cycle repeats.
Yeah, so the moral is don't ever go and take selfies with exotic animals. Like if you're ever traveling and you have that opportunity, just don't do it.
Yes. If it's a reputable place, they will not allow you to do that.
Yeah, and there's different so one of the things I just want to clarify briefly is what one of the things that's important is there are really great conservation organizations that are doing things with animals that might have some of those animals that they're rehabilitating in captivity. And so I know Carly knows this, but I just wanted to like echo, right? So there are, just like technically tigers are in captivity in Tiger King, there are also really great organizations working on tiger conservation that are trying to rehabilitate and possibly reintroduce tigers. And so it's one of the things that is, and none of us have said this, but people a lot of times throw around ultimatums with these things, and it's really not true in this space, because you really, like y'all said, it has to be a reputable place that is actually doing things for species conservation in the field, and there's a lot of these different sort of things. So as we wrap up, I think one of the things that we did last week that was kind of fun is we can each go on for a little like 1 or 2 minute rant of what has been nuts to us in conservation technology, and then kind of do a little bit of our closing. And for me, what's been really, it's not really a rant, but it's been kind of really cool, is as this like Twitch stream and like just chatting has started, I've gotten to talk to a lot of educators. And so that's kind of where I am in this space, is working on conservation technology education. And a lot of people are in it's kind of almost funny to me, is you have these civil engineers that are doing environmental science, and I'll like talk about conservation technology, and they're like, what? Like, we know about water, and we know, but wildlife, and it's just kind of a cool sort of thing to start to bridge the gap between those. And it's been something that's, and so Sarah, who was here last week, it's been something that's been really cool to talk about with her. So that's not really a rant, but just something I think is really cool that's going on right now. Shah, you wanna go next? Do you have any rant-worthy things in the last week of conservation tech?
I mean, to be honest, I do not have a rant this week. I don't have one. I'm actually fairly content at this moment.
Yeah.
I just realized I haven't yet played one of the roar shrieks, and I want to do that because it's basically the lemur version of a rant. If I just play something on my laptop, will it go come through?
I have no idea.
We're gonna find out.
Is this gonna be really loud?
I don't know.
How do you spell roar shriek? Is it because I type it in and I just see in my Google, I see roar Shrek, and I don't think that's correct.
Did you just hear some sound?
No.
No? Okay. Hold on.
Is it on? If it's on YouTube, you can send it to me. Is it on YouTube? Yes, we can hear
that. So that's a roar shriek. If you can...
That's cool.
They alternate between roaring, which is that like rah, 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 and the high-pitched squealing, which is like... I know my impressions are not great. They also have... This is another obnoxious call called a bark. Oh, it's kind of quiet. But yeah, they have a lot of weird ones. This is probably.
I feel like we're doing what Shah talked about earlier, where we're like sitting and we just have the headphones on and we're closing our eyes and kind of experiencing Botswana. But now we're just experiencing some of what it's like to.
Well, actually, Center of Albio, the research station we work with, they've just started doing virtual tours. So a lot of the like local economy in Ranamafan is based on ecotourism, and so they've lost that with COVID, obviously. But they've actually just gotten up and running with virtual tours. It's called Ranamafan Tours. It's on social media and online, and they have a website, and you can book a virtual tour like through the forest of Madagascar from the comfort of your home. And that's how they are adapting to COVID and like still doing conservation, like conservation work and raising money and things like that. So yeah, you can maybe hear that virtually, but still in Madagascar if you come across the lemurs on one of your virtual tours.
Yeah, I think virtual tour sounds like a good. If you could send me the information for that, Carly, I will share that with people in the chat possibly.
Yeah, I mean,
tomorrow.
I think it's literally like ranamafantours.com.
Virtual tours of Madagascar. Well, great. Well, thank you all so much for being on. Appreciate the.
Sorry, I'm gonna instead of sharing a rant, I'm gonna share something that blew my mind because I haven't actually watched this series yet, but I posted this on Twitter. But it's this like, what is it? Spider-tailed viper or something?
Oh yeah, have you not? Yeah, it's
I ran.
Yeah. I have not seen that before, but I just posted the link for it, and it is the coolest thing I've seen in my life, I think. Ever.
It was on
Go ahead, Carly.
It was on Seven Worlds, One Planet, the latest BBC special. David Attenborough narrates it. It was on their Asia episode.
Yeah, I haven't watched that yet, but I just saw that tweet and it just absolutely blew my mind.
Well, it's literally like when you watch that, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm watching an insect. This is so cool. And then you like look and you like focus your eyes focus a little bit more. And yeah, I got to take behavioral biology this summer, and that was one of the things that we talked about. And Shah, I kid you not, there's like 15 of those in the animal kingdom that exist. I mean, it's just, and it's not like some of them are probably cooler than that, some of them are less cool, but I mean, it's nuts. Some of the things that we probably didn't even get to today, that because there's so many things going on about acoustics. But thank you for being on. And the last thing is Carly, if you have any books, podcasts, whatever recommendations for anybody, and it could be anything, and I will share it. I will share it with our chat. So, do you have anything right now?
There's a podcast from an organization called Conservation Optimism, and they share like success stories within the conservation space, which granted are typically few and far between, but it's important to hold on to those success stories. And so they have a really good one that's kind of, good to listen to when you're in, because a lot of the conservation space is obviously very negative because,
there's not a lot of
so it's good to like remind yourself that there's good things happening and like so that's a good one. I don't really read books about I read like historical fiction stuff because in another life I would probably have been a history major. So a bunch of historical fiction books like The Nightingale or Beneath a Scarlet Sky, those are from World War II. Some that are nonfiction, like Code Girls, which is about female code breakers. And yeah, I love that kind of stuff. So books in that space.
Great. Thank you.